So I've just finished running my very first D&D campaign from start to finish as a DM, and I'm here to tell you about my experience with being a DM for a TTRPG and give you some information that I wish I had when I started off, and hopefully help you run your own game if you're a first time DM, or even if you're an experienced DM looking for new exciting techniques you can employ in your sessions. Before I jump into that, let me give you a bit of background about myself. So I'm someone who has studied film and has got a lot of experience in writing creatively. Naturally, I was quite drawn to the idea of being a storyteller. I am not an actor, so I am not very good at doing funny voices and such, but I still managed to run a very good campaign from start to finish that all of my players enjoyed. If you're not a confident voice actor yourself or are looking for ways to be a DM without having to put on your acting shoes, hopefully I can give you a few tips that can help you run an engaging campaign regardless of your acting ability or your vocal range. So I've just finished wrapping up my Blades in the Dark campaign. My players have just beat the big bad of the story. I'm going to do an epilogue session with them next week, and then we're moving on to our next campaign, which is going to be Girl by Moonlight, which is a magical girl themed RPG. If you're interested in checking out what we are playing, the channel for that is called DNV Tubers. The campaign I ran was actually ran using a VTT called One More Multiverse, which isn't going to be available anymore, unfortunately. It was a great tool to get started. In fact, that's one of the things I would recommend first. If you've never ran any TTRPG campaign before, I would recommend starting off using a virtual tabletop like Roll20 or something similar, purely because it does handle a lot of the maths for you. And it can be very daunting at first when you're trying to tell a story but also trying to work out math on the side. And multitasking like that can be difficult, and it is easier for your first time if you are using a tool to help you assist calculate the dice rolls. But that's not the only thing I would recommend if you're a first time DM. So I know a lot of you watching this want to play D&D 5e, which is the most popular one because everyone loves Dungeons and Dragons. But there are other modules and role-playing games out there that are a lot easier to run. And the one I ran was called Blades in the Dark, which uses a system called Powered by the Apocalypse or Forged in the Dark. And it's a system that only uses d6s. And it's a lot more focused on roleplay, so you don't have to worry too much about combat. And there's a lot less to learn about the game, which means you can focus more on the storytelling aspect of it, which is what I wanted to do. And I felt that running that was a lot easier than having to run a D&D 5e campaign, purely because when it comes to D&D, you do need to know the rules inside and out. And if you're new to the D&D hobby, this might be something that you might not have yet, but you'll probably acquire over the years as a player. For context, I was a player for D&D 5e for about 5 years before I ever DM'd my first session. And while I knew the rules very well, I wouldn't call myself an expert in it or anything, and I would still need to reference things very often. And that's one of the advantages I found in running Blades in the Dark, to the point where I wasn't looking at the rulebook at all when I was running the game. In fact, the only time I've ever looked at the rulebook whilst running that campaign was when I was setting up the whole thing, and then once it was all ready to go, I really didn't need to look at it again. Whereas when I ran my D&D 5e campaign, which I'm currently going through, which is Curse of Strahd, I'm constantly finding myself referencing back to the book over and over again. So if you are planning on running a 5e session, just bear that in mind. Unless you've memorized the entire Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master Guide, you're probably going to be having those books on hand next to you to resolve any queries. But that does bring me on to my next point. If you're going to be running a game from a source book like Curse of Strahd, or Descent into Avernus, or if you're making your own story. Something I did with Blade in the Dark that I don't think you can do with 5e as easily is that I can just completely disregard certain rules, because there really aren't many, and there are some aspects to the game that I felt my players probably wouldn't enjoy as much. And I wanted to tell us tighter, more focused narratives, so I did away with certain things. I just chose not to use them, and it had no negative impact, because it's a much more flexible system than D&D 5e is. If you are a storyteller and you want to tell your own story, I would recommend running Blades in the Dark as your first game, because it's a lot more friendly for that sort of thing. In fact, the rulebook itself doesn't have anything apart from a few suggestions and vague references to media that you could take inspiration from. So it's very easy to craft your own story with it. Whereas if you're running a module from a sourcebook like Curse of Strahd, if you're set on doing D&D 5e, I would say maybe go for it, because that is probably one of the best ways to do so, especially when it comes to doing it on something like Roll20, because you'll get a lot of pre-made assets for you that will make things things a lot easier, because one of the challenges I faced when doing my own campaign, when I was doing my own story, was having to make maps for sessions on a regular basis. In fact, I think that was most of my time when it came to my weekly DM prep for my sessions. So try, if you are doing your own story, try and reuse as many of your maps as possible to save on time. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in a cycle of perpetual DM prep. But that does also bring me on to my next point as well, over prepping. So when I first started off as a DM, my very first few sessions, I was very over prepped for everything, because I wanted every session to feel like, some really amazing handcrafted experience. And it got to the point where I realized I was shooting myself in the foot. I was really restricting myself narratively, and I felt sometimes doing less prep gave me more freedom to craft a story with my players and let them be more involved in the story process. And that ends up making sessions a lot more engaging. And you probably heard the term railroading quite a lot in the TTRPG space, and that usually comes down to DMs, I think, just over prepping and then wanting to make sure everything they prep gets used, because there'll be times when you'll prep an entire very complex puzzle for your player to solve, and then they find a solution within 5 minutes, and then you realize this entire 3 hour session that you planned is over instantly. So yeah, be prepared for that. In fact, have some improv ready to go. And I think the more experience you have being able to come up with things on the fly and being flexible and not railroading or, being too strict or over prepping would make you a better DM in the long term. So I think it's a very good experience making sure that you aren't being too strict with yourself, essentially, and giving yourself more wiggle room. Now, the next thing I want to mention is, as a DM, you'll be playing a lot of NPC characters, and the thing that prevents a lot of people from wanting to be a dungeon master or game master is that they'll say that they aren't very good at acting. They have no idea how to change their voice for various characters, and lack of confidence in being able to play multiple characters at once is the main barrier preventing them from trying out being a dungeon master. And I'm not a very good actor. I am a terrible voice actor. I don't do any voices for my characters. But what I did do, I took inspiration from one of my favorite video games, Divinity Original Sin, made by Larian, which you guys all know, made Baldur's Gate 3. And the narrator in Divinity Original Sin 2 narrates a lot of what's going on as if it's a story, and I adopted that into my own DM style. So when I have my NPCs talking, I'll narrate it like it's a story. So I'll say things like, you walk into a bar and a drunkenly pirate stumbles over to you, slurring his words, and challenges you to a duel for ownership of your dog. And I could have acted that out as the pirate. If you're someone who's not confident in acting out scenes like that, or doing voices, or changing your voice for different characters, I'd say try doing that as your approach, and you might be more comfortable. Maybe later on, if you want to try doing voices for characters after you've established a few of them. In fact, I'll give you a quick tip when it comes to creating NPC characters. If you are making characters of your own, if you want your characters to feel like actual living people and not one-dimensional caricatures, unless that's what you're going for. Sometimes I do make one-dimensional caricatures as a joke in the campaign because it makes them stand out, and it does make my players laugh. So don't dismiss that completely. But I'm just saying, if you want to make your characters seem like believable people who have depth to them, but you don't want to spend your entire week making elaborate backstories for these characters, what I'd recommend doing is, in fact, you can use your dice. Just get 2d12, roll them, pick 2 zodiac signs. So pick one zodiac from the Chinese lunar calendar, so like maybe Year of the Monkey, and then one star sign like Sagittarius. Look up what those zodiac personalities are, combine them. There you go. You've got a list of bullet points for how to play that character and make them feel like an actual person. So if you need to make NPCs on the fly really quick like that, it'll give you the framework for making a character. You can fill the rest in later, because there will be times when your players will talk to the most random NPC possible and they'll get attached to them and want to know their name and everything about their personality and stuff. And if you're someone who always preps that sort of thing beforehand, you'll find yourself at a loss for when that happens in the middle of your campaign, and you'll be stumbling over yourself trying to fill in the blanks the last second. And I think it's good practice just to have a system ready to make a character on the fly, on the spot. In fact, just think of 2 random star signs and what you know about them, and stick that into the character, and you've got a rough skeleton on how to play that character for your players. Now, when it comes to session prepping, I think thing that took the most time for me specifically, it might not be the same for you, depends on what you're running. Like I said, if you're running a module, you might not have this issue because they make a lot of the assets for you. But making maps and character tokens and stuff, if you're running your own campaign with your own characters, your own story, your own world, that is a thing that's going to take up most of your time. And for that, I would really recommend looking up community resources. So you can look up asset packs for maps and tokens. A lot of them are free, but if you want to pay for a few, there are some very good artists out there who have made some premium assets you can always use. And I would say don't be afraid to use pre-made assets. Not everything has to be handcrafted by you specifically. In fact, spending some money or less time on making art assets means you have more time to craft your own story. And I know that's where my talents lie is in writing and storytelling. So I normally would just hire an artist or even look up free community packs for assets for monsters, maps, character tokens. And I would really recommend looking some up because there are some very good sources out there. In fact, I'll give you one tip. So one of the campaigns I'm going to be running in the future is a gothic horror RPG set during Victorian times and such. And one thing I found, someone else suggested this on, I think, on a Reddit thread somewhere that I found. I can't remember which one it was now, but I just saw that and I thought it was the most genius thing I ever thought of. But when it came to making maps for that campaign, all I did was look up Victorian mansion floor plans on like library sources or even Google Images and such. And those are absolutely perfect for battle maps or like, area maps for that kind of setting. So if you're someone who's going to be running something like Call of Cthulhu campaign, look up something like this, Victorian mansion floor plans. And you can very easily find open source images like this, or you can just straight up use as a map for games like Call of Cthulhu. And I think it adds an extra layer of immersion. I'm planning on using things like this for games of Varsen, which I'll be running, which is a Nordic horror RPG, which uses a D6 system very similar to Blades in the Dark. If you're ever in need of a map for a church or a town hall or something, try searching floor plans for it and see you can come up with a free open source stuff this way, which is a really creative way to go about making immersive maps for your players. In fact, you can even use apps like Google Earth to take screenshots of real life places if you're having sessions set in the real world. But there are plenty of great open source assets out there you can use. In fact, I'll give you the name of a few that I use. If you need things like music or artwork, there are websites like Pexels, Pexels. So it's like Pixels but with an E. And there's also Pixabay, Pixabay. Those are places where you can find royalty-free assets like pictures, music, artwork, which I use all the time. Especially when it comes to music, they are very good sources for music for my campaign, and I like using music in an immersive way to get my players into the game. So I would recommend having a look around for things you can use for your campaign, but also don't restrict your searches to just D&D or TTRPG related. If you think outside the box a little bit, depending on what you need for your campaign, you might find exactly what you need in other places. Now, I know the other daunting thing when it comes to session prepping as a DM is when you have players drop out and have to continue the campaign either with less players or someone just misses a session and you think everyone has to now cancel. What I found actually, and this is coming from my experience in writing for film and TV and such, because I have a degree in film and I've written a lot of screenplay stuff. And personally, I based a lot of my writing techniques for my campaign on sitcom writing, which if you are interested in making an episodic D&D campaign type series, I would recommend following a sitcom format because it works so well. But taking inspiration from TV shows. Whenever I've had sessions or weeks where certain players couldn't make it and I had less players available, instead of cancelling the session, I would do bottle episodes that you normally see a lot on TV shows. For example, in Avatar The Last Airbender, some of the best episodes were ones with only two characters like Zuko and Katara going off on their little adventure, or Zuko and Aang going off on their adventure, or Zuko and Sokka having a little adventure, or Zuko and Toph. I would recommend doing bottle episodes for your sessions, and if you're doing long sessions, you can always do flashbacks. So if your characters are in the middle of a dungeon, one session, and the next session, two of your players aren't able to make it, so only have like maybe three or maybe even two people available, depending on the size of the party, have a flashback session where it takes place before they even went on the adventure, possibly, or before they even went to the dungeon. And in fact, it can be an excuse to reuse one of your maps previously. Just to give you an example of what I mean, if you've only got like two people for a session, have a flashback to a time when they were locked in a room together. In fact, just parody the moment in Drake and Josh when he asks where the door is, and you'll find that some of those sessions are the absolute best when it comes for roleplay. I've done sessions where I've only had 2 players available, and those ended up being some of the most memorable sessions I've run. And you don't need to do much prep for them either. But don't be afraid to run a few sessions with less players, because life gets in the way all the time. And sometimes people have other priorities and commitments that are very important and they'll need to take care of beforehand. So don't ever take it too personally if people keep cancelling or not showing up. And in fact, I've often used times when I wasn't running a session to give myself an extra week to prep extra ideas. Or just take a rest. There's nothing wrong with having a break and putting your feet up. It's good to take care of yourself from time to time, so don't be afraid to ever cancel a session if you're feeling burnt out and you need a break from it. In fact, that's something you should make very clear with the entire table at the very start, and that it should be okay for players to take breaks if they need to, or step away from the campaign. Playing D&D should never have to feel like a chore or a commitment. It should be for fun, which is the most important thing. Thank you for watching my video. Please comment below if you have any other tips that you want to share with me specifically, or if you learned anything from me. This is a new channel as well, so please do drop a sub. Help me get to 1k subscribers. I would really appreciate it. And I actually stream my D&D campaigns on my separate YouTube channel specifically for that, called D&V Tubers. I'll have it pinned in the comments down below. Do check it out. My Blaze in the Dark campaign has just wrapped up, and we'll be starting a new campaign playing a game called Girl by Moonlight, which is a magical girl themed RPG system. And we're doing a very sci-fi inspired campaign based around mecha, like Gundam. So if you're interested in that, please do check us out. Or just check out some of my other videos. I also stream on this channel, so if you ever want to chat with me directly, feel free to drop by whenever I'm live, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one.